Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we've built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We've been helping life science companies from across the globe over the past 12 years do everything from virtualize their advisory board meetings, medical education events, co-author working groups, and even large events like corporate events, hackathons, sales training, and everything in between. But more importantly, we really believe at Impetus that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with leading edge thinkers, digital thought leaders, provocateurs, that we can all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So we believe that not only starting these conversations, but it's really important to sustain them, to build them over time, to bring other stakeholders around the table. And this is precisely what we do with the Impetus Insight platform. So I'm really thrilled to have one of these thought leaders, these pharmaceutical thought leaders. This is Carol Stiff. Carol has actually spent the last 22 years in a variety of roles in the pharmaceutical and biotech sectors. She's done everything from agency services, patient services. She's done sales and marketing and all kinds of organizational building. She's currently the head of Santen. In her 4 years at Santen, Carol has built and executed the Canadian entry plans for prescription, surgical device, and over-the-counter products in ophthalmology. Carol has also played an extended role in supporting the Santen USA team in developing their patient services program. Welcome, Carol. So happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Impetus for having this valued conversation. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So thrilled to have this. As you know, there's so much conversation these days about STEM or STEAM, however you want to call this, which is, sciences, technology, mathematics, arts, and that the whole technology area, wanting to get more and more women involved, included. Tell us a little bit about how you got to the place you're heading up a company. This doesn't happen all the time. We'd love to get an understanding a little bit about your career trajectory and how you landed in the place you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that I've had the good fortune of a variety of different opportunities up until this point in time, always on the commercial side. And when I say up until this point in time, I do have some responsibilities for other parts of the Canadian organization. But historically and leading up to now, it's all been sort of commercial side of the business. And as you mentioned the beginning in your introductions, Natalie, my career started off actually on the agency side after I graduated from a post-degree program in public relations. So to be honest with you, I kind of accidentally or serendipitously, if you will, ended up in sort of the healthcare industry. And the first job that I landed, which was on the agency side, and it was on in this healthcare agency, where I found myself exposed to a plethora of different life sciences companies. And so in this company, I was in some roles around project coordination, and then I was afforded the opportunity to start to get my feet wet in a sales opportunity, and this kind of led me to my foray into sales on the pharma side of the business. And it really, my intention when I came into sales in pharma was, like a lot of people, sort of intended to be a bit of a stepping stone into a marketing role and, more commercial roles. I did not expect actually to love the role as much as I did. And so, those kind of planned couple of years ended up turning into 10 years. But I no regrets on that whatsoever, and in fact, actually, gave me the opportunity to work in sales from a primary care standpoint, from a specialty standpoint, hospital sales in some pretty unique therapeutic areas. So I'm really grateful for that experience that I had. From there, I moved into a few patient services roles. And, this was at a time actually where the industry was really just kind of cutting its teeth on patient support programs, if I could use that expression, in that, we were just starting to explore and starting to understand, what the value was of these programs, what the place was of these programs, what the management looked like. And I would say, a side note here, this was probably the most rewarding time of my career, in that, I got the opportunity to really see the direct impact, of those therapies that we were commercializing, the impact that they were making on patients. There's nothing second to hearing about a patient, who may have been bedridden and, got back to, life functioning, or got back to work, or a patient that, got out of a wheelchair and started walking again. There's just, I can't even sort of put into words how impactful that is, and those types of things to hear about, that end result of what we're ultimately doing. So that was an exceedingly rewarding time in my career. But from there, I went on to some traditional marketing roles, which ultimately led me to the sales and marketing lead at Santen, Canada. And then really just through a series of organizational changes and a number of opportunities that were afforded to me by the organization, I worked with my current boss now to build out the Canadian entry plans, as you've mentioned, for RX, for device, and for OTC for Santen, Canada. And lo and behold, here we are. We launched a prescription product just over a year ago, and we're in the launch process for a device, and planning also for an OTC product. And so that's it, kind of in a nutshell.
Fascinating and phenomenal, and good for you, and such a great inspiration to so many other people starting in this space as well. So I'd love to kind of linger on the world according to Carol, especially since COVID-19. And I think, I really like to double click a little bit on the whole essence around product launching and what the heck one does during emergency situations like that. So tell us what leadership meant to you prior to COVID. And did any of that change since the pandemic in how you were sort of leading the organization, planning for the organization, and any of your thoughts? So has leadership changed at all, in your opinion, in the past year?
I would say yes and no. There's things that we have to be cognizant of now that, maybe we weren't before. So, I think a couple of things, productivity for our team, working remotely is, I think that's the name of the game right now. I think we all know that we've pivoted towards that. And so, do things kind of shift within that, in that mindset? Yes. In that, initially, I would say, I was a bit worried, what is our productivity going to be looking like, while we pivot to this virtual environment, how are we going to stay connected? And so all of those things sort of run through your mind, and especially at the onset of COVID, like we had no idea that, I would never have guessed that we'd be, 15 months later and we'd still be sort of in the same scenario. So, it's shifted from the standpoint that, the remote scenario can be very challenging. I think that there's two things. One, I think the productivity our team has shown within, the confines of being virtual has been fantastic. And in fact, I would say our productivity has probably even increased. You don't have those commute times, and, there's no distractions at being at the office, when people are walking by your office, and, and that type of thing. However, I do think that there are a couple of things that have shifted quite significantly, in that face-to-face is not there anymore, and it does come at a cost. And so, one of the things is that missing face-to-face interaction. So, we've had 4 new team members join since we were virtual. So, from a leadership standpoint, there is a limitation about how integrated you can make a team member feel when you're only ever over a screen. So especially for those who are new to the team, and they've never met people in face to face. So these 4 team members have never met the rest of the team face to face. So it's a bit of a challenge from that standpoint. And there's there's just that intangible that's missing in terms of that human connection. And that's one of the challenges, I think, from a leadership standpoint, is doing everything that we possibly can to try to make up for that as much as possible without overdoing the virtual and the Zoom scenario. And I'll give you a perfect example of where I feel like a little bit of that connection gets missed is, not only do we have the new people that have joined, but we had an individual on our team that, shortly after COVID, one of the best experiences I'm sure in life is, she became pregnant, and she experienced her entire pregnancy, has had her child, and she's on maternity leave. And none of us got to see her during that time. And, we're a very small, sort of tight knit team, and that's, there's an intangible that's missed there. There's a, just a human connection that's, unfortunate. And, I feel a little sad that, that was something that we didn't get to sort of experience with her and celebrate as we would have when we were sort of face to face. So, making sure that, we're trying to do things to make sure that we are keeping that connection as a team. And, one of the things that, I was very purposeful at the beginning and have, I would say, probably accelerated a little bit is our culture building and our team building. So, put some programs, formalized programs in place where, we're building on and creating purposefully what our culture is, and making sure, that we're really being cognizant of applying our culture, when we're a bit removed from each other. And I think, the other part that's shifted for me from this standpoint is, it's kind of, the pandemic's kind of pushed me into a little bit of a different way, I suppose, in terms of managing and trying to sort of enforce that work-life harmony. So I think we all know that for, a plethora of reasons, we're all now in back to back to back to back, as you had mentioned, even just before we got on the call, we're all in these back to back meetings. And, it's hard to kind of catch your breath in between. So, trying to, for myself, but also for my team, trying to enforce that harmony, we were in the midst of a launch, and preparations for a second launch were already busy enough times, compounding COVID into that, it just sort of snowballs. So while it's not typically my style, what I've started to do is enforce certain policies. I don't want to say with an iron fist, but more proactively than I typically would. So, for example, a policy of no meetings on Fridays. With all of these meetings that we're participating in, it gets very difficult, as we all know, to keep up on your emails and your other tasks and just the work that you need to get done. And so, I've been very forceful, I guess, if you could use the word, about making sure the team is not scheduling any internal meetings on Fridays, so that we can use that time to catch up a little bit on work, maybe not entirely, but at least a little bit, try to sort of pull us out of that rabbit hole. No emails while you're on vacation, that type of thing. And my team doesn't know it yet, but even sort of, I think I'm going to take a step further on that. And not only are you required to not email when you're on your vacation, those of us who are not on vacation, if that person does decide to email, we don't respond as a team, because I think what we need to do here is commit to our personal lives and our personal mental health, as much as we are committing so much further into work right now. So I think, just kind of coming full circle to the question, I think that those are, just different challenges from a leadership standpoint that we were maybe not facing before COVID, or at least not to the same extent.
That's brilliant, lovely ideas. And I just think it's phenomenal, Carol, about what you've been able to do and think proactively around culture and culture building, and making it actually feel tangible. Because sometimes, a lot of times, it's just that je ne sais quoi, it's the thing that you do and you don't really put a label, but now it's a thing. And on that note, I'm also just curious around how you talk or enable vulnerability within the context of meetings when it doesn't feel real and it doesn't feel human anymore, especially in the context of what we're really deeming as mental wellness, mental health, all of the things that are going on. It's impacted us one way or the other, either through our work or family, or just, the inability to get out of your lockdowns or whatever in nature that looks like, affecting one's kind of mental situations. So is there an opportunity, or have you created a space for vulnerability and sharing and getting people in a place of safety and security. And what would you say to other leaders who are looking at, you know, starting or establishing a company in this virtual world?
Yeah, you know, and it's a great question. And, you know, and I think, you know, when I was thinking about, you know, some of the questions that we were going to discuss today, that's one of the things that sort of I kind of noted as a bit of a positive fallout of the pandemic that I think has kind of happened somewhat organically, but also as a result of sort of who our team is we've got the opportunity, you know, when we're all on these Zoom calls and or Teams calls or whatever platform you're on constantly, and you know, people have kids at home and you know their spouses are at home working, and so it's a different environment. And I think one of the interesting things that's come out of this is it allows us a little bit of a glimpse into each other as human beings, you know, as human beings outside of just the work environment. So, you know, and I'm sure you experience this, I'm sure everybody out there experiences, you know, you're on a Zoom call and, you know, somebody's doorbell rings and it's a courier and you've got to run down to sign for something, or, you know, there's kids crying in the background or kids coming in checking, you know, if mom and dad are, you know, on a phone call, or, you know, dogs barking because the dog walker has shown up. And, you know, I think that these are kind of, to me, I see these as actually really a positive thing, because it allows us just to see each other a little bit more holistically, that you know there's more to us than just what we see at work. And I think naturally our team, as I mentioned earlier, sort of by nature of who we are, and you know the purposeful approach, you know, that I've had and the team's had in terms of who we're adding to our team, ultimately, you know, we've created an environment of trust to start off with, even sort of pre-pandemic. And so I think that that's allowed our team to have no fear, and even in fact, you know, welcome some of these interruptions into our days and into our meetings. And you know, oftentimes it kind of results in a little bit of a laugh and a little bit of back to sort of one of the points you made earlier about sort of, you know, disrupting our conversations a little bit. And it can be a very good thing. And you know, I found that I think this is something that's actually building around our camaraderie. And you know, each time one of those, kind of back to your questions about the vulnerability, I think, you know, each time one of those interruptions happen, you know, we make a joke out of it, and you know, we make light of it instead of making it an issue, and in fact encouraging those things. I think that just encourages the next show of vulnerability and the next sharing. And you know, so I think, you know, some of that's natural and organic. And then other things that we've done, and I have to say, remiss, I don't know if my team is on the call or not, but, you know, we did at the beginning of the pandemic do some things like, you know, virtual cocktail parties, or, you know, a happy hour, and, you know, just kind of created that situation where it was no work. Let's just kind of catch up. How's everybody feeling? We haven't done that as much lately, you know, and I think that that's, you know, something that maybe is a remiss, and that we should get back to a little bit, seeing as, you know, we're probably still going to be working at home for a little bit.
Depending on where you live, but again, it could
True,
be
true.
Canada-wide for sure. Absolutely. It's one of those insane things that's just never ending.
Yeah.
So interesting. And I love how you've really just encapsulated the essence of building resilience, and just the resilience of the team. And I think in light of really what you've had to do, it's not only just one or two, but you've had to hire 4 brand new people completely remotely. How do you train? How do you onboard? How do you get them familiar with the company coffers, the tribal knowledge that happens at the water cooler? What did Carol do to try to integrate these people into the fold?
Yeah, you know what, I think we started off, clearly we started off as a very tiny organization. You know, there was only you know, a year and a half ago there was only 3 of us. And so, you know, we developed most of the program that we had developed in terms of our onboarding, you know, trainings, you know, your compliance trainings, your administrative trainings, you know, your product, etc. You know, all of that stuff was developed sort of with a virtual in mind to begin with. And I think probably just ironically, you know, I'm not sure that we, you know, just being completely honest, I'm not sure that we really had the foresight of that. It just so happened to be that case. And so, So, so that was sort of, that infrastructure was kind of already there for us. But, in terms of, just kind of making sure that connection's happening, and making sure that, the legacy of knowledge and experience within the organization has stayed put, is just making sure that the new people that are coming on board are enveloped into the team, and that we are purposeful in terms of making sure that we're turning on our cameras when we have a new person that's joining, so you can at least see who somebody's face is. Maybe not all the time and for the whole meeting, but at least sort of making that introduction. And in fact, I think one of the things that I have actually learned from my team, and I think that they've taught me well on, is just making sure that we're setting aside time and reaching out just as a checkpoint, even if it's a 5-minute call, saying, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling? Are you feeling like you're kind of catching up? Are you feeling like you're connecting with the team? Are you feeling disjointed? And and sometimes there's no answer, right? Sometimes there's just, you're feeling disconnected because you aren't face to face, and there's not always an answer for that. But the one thing we can do is just continue to reach out and make those connection points as much as we can, until we do have the ability to get back face to face.
Beautiful, Carol. Love the answer. Launching a product, albeit two, but that's a whole other discussion. Launching products in a remote virtual world. So in a lot of ways, COVID has accelerated some things that probably were going to be inevitable in the future anyway. It just made it happen sooner, faster. Were we prepared or not? It was a wave that just, blew us over, and, the strong sort of succeeded through it. So we have traditional ways that we do product launches in the pharmaceutical industry, and there's like a process, and there's people involved, and you're getting awareness, and you're getting the regulatory approvals, and then you're getting everybody out there to talk about the product. Now suddenly sales representatives and medical science liaisons are not able to get in front of people physically anymore, where there's that trust and credibility and all these things that we're used to, or medical education events or conferences, so data can be disseminated. What did you do in that scenario where you're suddenly with this head scratcher? How am I going to succeed with a product launch when I can't get in front of the prescriber?
Yeah. So, I think, this was, I think for us, it was, for everybody, it was a challenge. And, and then this, forced everybody to kind of pivot. And, I sort of see, what kind of happened to us was, in the midst of a launch, we were impacted, kind of to your point, from, that field perspective. So, from the sales representatives and the MSL perspective, and then, from the internal organization. And, we of course saw from a field standpoint, and still to this day, we don't have any flights. So nobody's getting on a plane right now. So, everything, virtually everything is virtual. So, what we've seen, and what I think probably one of the biggest challenges for the specific product that we have, is that this is translated over to patients, and not just us as an organization, but that, of course, has fallout for us, and that there's a reduced volume of patients that are coming into a healthcare professional's office. So, and then when they do come into the office, there's new parameters. So you can't have the same amount of patients in a waiting room that you could a year and a half ago. And, in ophthalmology, which is the focus for our company, you have patient laneways, and you can't have patients as close together in the laneways that you used to. So that means ultimately, at the end of the day, those patient volumes are reduced. And even something as simple as oftentimes caregivers are not allowed to come into the office with patients anymore. So all of this adds in a layer of complexity. All of it adds in the time that it takes to see a patient, to get anything done. As we all know, that seems to be extended across the board, not even just in healthcare. But this ultimately, what I think has happened is, it means that there's almost an extension, what I'm seeing anyways, is an extension of that launch time frame. So, we would always sort of typically call a product new for 2 years. And, I kind of see that extending now, because you've got this reduced volume of patients coming into a healthcare professional's office. What that translates into is a reduction in in the physician's ability to have clinical experience with the product and build that clinical confidence. Oftentimes that happens pretty rapidly because you've got high volume patient load, but as that decreases, that doesn't happen as quickly. So that sort of extends our time points. But ultimately, I think what's served us well in terms of pivoting these touch points, that everything has gone virtual for us. All of our OLAs, all of our CMEs, all of our ad boards, everything is on a virtual platform right now, and that has been we've had a great level of receptivity to that from our customers, and doors have. I have to say, fortunately for us, doors have stayed open pretty well. And one of the things that we have learned here is that, we were fortunate in that the field force that came to us came with experience in this therapeutic area. So they did have a good knowledge base of the healthcare professionals and pre-existing relationships. And so what we have heard from healthcare professionals that served us well in the launch was these pre-existing relationships. So it's a whole lot easier to pick up the phone and say, hey, Natalie, it's Carol, and you recognize, who I am. So you're more apt to kind of keep that door open. And so a big lesson learned for us as we move into sort of our next launch. But I think the other thing too is that the impact is customization. So another thing that we're hearing from our healthcare professionals is there's no cookie cutter fit anymore. You have to customize your approach to each individual healthcare professional at each individual touch point. What one healthcare professional may be comfortable with in terms of meeting you for lunch, if it's permitted in your area, another healthcare professional will want everything to be virtual, and that may ebb and flow over time and vaccination, et cetera. So, it's really adjusting and customizing the individual approach at the individual time to the healthcare professional. And then, of course, like I said, all of that, pivoting to different opportunities that we weren't maybe not looking at before. So doing some all of these things that I've mentioned virtually, but revisiting our websites and those digital touch points that maybe we weren't hugely focusing on before. So right now, I think again, this is just adaptation and pivoting right now is still the name of the game, and still exploring what new options are. And I think it's we're a year into the pandemic, but it still feels a bit early, I suppose, in terms of implementing new technologies and new approaches to our tactics. I don't know,
so you brought up something
Natalie.
Yeah, so it's fantastic. So you brought up some really important points, including the dynamics around the sales or MSL interacting and speaking and educating physicians around new products, what the advantages are, et cetera, who then actually prescribe the medications to their patients. In a lot of ways, that dynamic has really greatly modified. There's advantages and opportunities on how that's actually being done. But one of the questions ultimately has to do with the physician interaction through telemedicine. And in addition to it it's our patients coming to the table anymore. But there's also the question around clinical trials and how are patients coming to the trials and where is the share of voice? So again, people are preoccupied with COVID. They're worrying about that. They're not necessarily worrying about their own diagnosis. Physicians are worrying about other things. How are you getting that share of voice and interceding when even the physician-patient interaction is no longer in person, and it may not follow the same dynamic, or people are going to somebody else through some other telemedicine portal that they're paying a specific fee, and they're not going to necessarily their same physician. And so even that convoluted approach of this physician equals these patients or this territory, and now it's like the smorgasbord where suddenly the territory is Canada and who gets compensated for what. So it ends up becoming a soup mix of change. So I'm just curious on that note, Carol, is how does pharma intercede in this new dynamic between patients and physicians and the uprising of the importance of patients in this whole equation?
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned this, I think, in the last question about what has sort of pushed us I guess, propelled us, let's say, into a pathway maybe that the industry was already going. And I think there's sort of a connection here with, with what you're talking about, and sort of that patient connection. And I think, there's and I think this is a good thing, don't get me wrong, a general trend in the industry towards patient centricity. This sort of seems to be kind of the catchphrase right now within the industry. And I completely agree with it. The whole point at the end of the day of the things that we're doing is to have patient benefit. And, some of the things I think that we're learning as the industry has evolved is, well, how do we do what's right for the patient if we're never involving the patient in anything that we're doing? And so, hence the industry has evolved down that pathway. And I think from our standpoint, from a Santen standpoint, I know lots of companies will sort of talk the talk on the patient centricity standpoint. I really, truly believe Santen is committed to walking that talk. We have a number of initiatives underway that will involve patients in sort of everything from, our clinical trial design to, understanding, how patient advisory boards on, how do we communicate, once we have done a good clinical trial, how does that information get translated best to the patient? So, really kind of getting involved with the patients at the grassroots level, versus just always kind of going through the healthcare professional, asking the healthcare professional, what do what do your patients need to hear? Well, how about we ask the patients? And so, I do think that this, this has started to, the pandemic has kind of propelled that a little bit more. Pushed us to sort of think about that patient, that user end, more so than maybe we were previously. And we're also looking at augmenting number of our programs, like patient support programs are, we've looked at sort of moving that to a little bit more of a digital option too, versus just always being sort of, a physical, let's say a card, like the financial support programs, like a card that may be given out by the healthcare professional to a patient, looking at different ways to be able to get that information to a patient who, maybe they had a telemedicine appointment with the doc. How does that doc get that card physically to the patient? Well, they can't really now. And so, what's another way to kind of work around that? So yeah, I think it is sort of propelling us more forward into integrating, patients within the development of our therapies and the communication about our therapies out to patients. And, and I think back to the conversation that I had with a healthcare professional maybe 6 months or so ago. And, he was mentioning, and I thought this was really insightful, in that he had noted that, healthcare seems to be more at the forefront of a patient's mind now. And, the pandemic has kind of shifted things, and it's reprioritized things for, I think, probably for all of us, but especially if you're a patient, with a life-threatening or a sight-threatening or a chronic disease. What he had noted is, sometimes there are therapies within our therapeutic area where, a patient may have to pay out of pocket for. And, what they've noted is, or what this physician had noted was, there seemed to be a little bit of a shift in mindset, in that the patients may be more willing to have that conversation about what the benefits might be for them in terms of, choosing a different therapy that, may cost them out of pocket. But he just sort of noted that there was just a shift in that paradigm a little bit. And, I wonder if that's just, a natural result of kind of putting that our health at the forefront of our minds. So I think, that there's a shift on both sides of the fence, which I think is a positive thing.
Love it. We're getting into an interesting place, Carol. I mean, it's kind of a funny world because we're sort of semi in lockdown, not lockdown, and everybody's doing something different globally and in Canada. But the hope is there. We can see there's a light. We can start to see it. Yeah. Now, as we start emerging into that future place, it does beg the question of, what is the new normal going to look like? And I know that's so cliche. We've overheard that word. The idea here is, what does hybrid mean? We're seeing that over and over again as it relates to in-person meetings versus virtual, and doing both of them. Hybrid conferences, hybrid advisory boards. How are we doing virtual? You can call it asynchronous or synchronous, or synchronous and virtual at the same time. How are we going to approach this uber customization that I think you mentioned earlier? How difficult is that going to be for pharma to be able to entertain that based on physician preference, available budgeting and funding that you have? And what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's interesting just as you were saying this, Natalie, I just sort of started thinking about this term hybrid and and I think it's an appropriate term, but um is that actually in and of itself just our new normal? Is this, I feel a little bit like the name of the game really is flexibility and adaptation, to that customized approach. And I do think that this is, if not here permanently, then certainly for the long term. It's much like anything when things evolve. Some things fall off, and other things come to the surface. So, I think a very simple sort of example is we're not spending as much budget in terms of, let's say, advisory boards or even OLAs, where we're spending that, budget on travel. So, that frees up budget to shift over to other, virtual technologies, where we can reach a larger audience in a much more cost-effective way. So, we are still truly, muddying through all of that. But, I do definitely see this as a long-term approach to the business. Overarching is just this flexibility. So, not just the approach to our healthcare professionals, but even, as employees within an organization. I think, what we've seen now is and I think, I don't think anybody would be silly enough to argue that, we can be productive working remotely now too. So, that quote unquote hybrid, not only for our approach to our healthcare professionals and to the industry, but also our approach to our employees, and being flexible and allowing our employees to have that sort of hybrid approach to their work is, do you need to be in the office Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, every week, in and out? No, I don't think that we do. And I think, we've noted now that there's value in being able to flex and adapt to not only the organization's need, but the individual employees' need as well, so that they can, foster the greatest productivity.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. And I really think this is going to be, there's all these conversations going on in corporate worlds right now is, what do you do with the real estate and not, and do we make these more open spaces? And so lots of conversations happening there. Equally, there is the same hybrid conversation that's happening as it relates to patients. We hear a lot about these decentralized clinical studies. Before, patients would have to go into offices, or there would be CROs or other people visiting and all kinds of things happening. There was some sort of physical contact. Even some of the studies that were done for the clinical endpoints had to be done in person. Now we're starting to hear about this option, giving even patients the option of how they want to participate in the trial. They can continue in the traditional sense, and by companies starting to incorporate wearables, to enable patient reported outcomes, is suddenly opening the doors for a more global engagement with a larger audience, potentially to enhance recruitment and get studies done and discovery and identification of new products a lot faster. So, in your opinion, do you think that our regulatory departments should be looking at this to start looking at, using smartwatches or other sorts of other ways for patients to be able to enroll and to be able to participate where there's resilient endpoints in these clinical studies, so that you can give even patients the option for hybrid participation or these decentralized trials?
Yeah, I think, I'm certainly not a regulatory expert or, an expert on clinical trials. I think, in the ophthalmology space, it does pose, there can be some unique challenges, simply because, typically measures need to be something that's done in a physical exam, with specified equipment. So it's not always, the clinical trial measures may not always be conducive to sort of a virtual setting. But, what I can say is, yes, I think that certainly absolutely is the industry, and, sort of from an ophthalmology standpoint, interested in and looking into these options. Yeah, 100%. And I think we would be remiss if we did not.
I was also curious about your thoughts as we start to project into the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning and smart algorithms, as we start to think about people who are doing the diagnostics, who are looking and examining certain ways that the eye looks and what the patterns are. And we're using these diagnosticians who are, deciding on what's happening. as we start to delve into this world where smart machines are doing this, do you see a change in the role of physicians and the dynamics of how pharmaceutical companies and who they're working with, and the acceleration, if you will, of getting patients diagnosed more rapidly and more widely?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, and I think yes, do we have to look at all of these opportunities? Yes, I think we do, and I think even the pandemic, I think is something that I think is going to force us into this scenario a little bit more. I think we all we're all so focused on COVID and what's happening with COVID, and of course this is of the utmost importance. But I think we can't forget too is that there are other diseases and other conditions that people are still suffering from in the midst of the pandemic that are completely unrelated to the pandemic. And I think we need to remember that there are growing waiting lists, for patients from a surgical standpoint. Those surgical timelines are growing and on top of that, I think, we're all hearing that, there's growing evidence out there to suggest that patients are putting off going to see their healthcare professional. And so, their diagnoses are coming much later in their disease or their condition. So they're in more advanced stages or more severe stages of their disease. So, are these technology, some of these technologies, are there opportunities and some potential solutions that we can capitalize on to accelerate the shrinking of those backlogs and timelines that we're going to have on the other end of the pandemic.
It'll be very interesting to see what happens. And I'm sure, as in all things, technology accelerates at a very rapid pace. So this could happen, in the next 5 to 10 years. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens at the level of the physician. Do they become data scientists? Or do they just become the people who are really dealing at the bedside and letting the machines and things like that doing some of the diagnostics? But it also actually makes us ask the question of the pharmaceutical model. Currently, we have certain standard positions. We have sales representatives, medical science liaisons in the medical affairs departments, market access. With COVID-19, do you see there being any transformation in any of those roles? And more specifically, my question is around the traditional territories. When we talk about virtual, you're now talking about one-to-many across geographical boundaries, potentially past time zones and language barriers, because asynchronously you can have translation buttons and all sorts of things. Do you see there being any transformation in roles, potentially changing what we currently have or building new ones in the future pharmaceutical model?
It's a good question. I think, from where we are in terms of our organization, as I've mentioned, we're quite small. So we have a sales team that is as lean as it possibly could be. So I think that, we capitalize on that right from get-go. But I do think that, that whole shift, like we talked about it, that customized approach and, things being virtual, can you do more now with less? Yes. Because we're not getting on a plane, you're not spending, our reps have large geographies. So, you're not spending, several days in a given month on a flight. That's, just downtime. So, that's freed up opportunity to look at doing other things. And, for example, the sales reps supporting the marketing team in the implementation or the development of some of the tactics that we're looking to commercialize. So, I do see a little bit of, I don't want to say blurred lines, but I guess an over meshing of particularly sort of sales and marketing. So, working a little bit more in tandem versus siloed in terms of, the implementation of tactics and strategies. And, and how do we, looking at ways of, overlaying marketing tactics that cover the country broadly that, are a little easier to do right now than frankly they were, 15 months ago. Now, that being said, do I see guardrails and firewalls staying between functions, for example, med affairs, MSLs, and reps? Yes, I just, from a compliance and a legal standpoint, I don't see that going away at all. And that, who knows, those parameters could get a little tighter too, as we start to reach more virtually. But yeah, I think certainly from a commercial standpoint, there's a little bit more of an overlap, and an opportunity to develop more skill sets on both sides of the fence.
Fascinating. As we're emerging out of one of the biggest, you know, confluence of change and, through this pandemic and social unrest and political upheaval and everything else that just kind of happened simultaneously, there's been a lot of discussion and conversation around healthcare costs. It's now suddenly blossomed. Everybody's now an armchair physician. Patients are talking about mechanisms of action. I've never seen so many news media channels who know now how to explain how an mRNA vaccine works. So, but it has definitely shone the light on medicine, on health. My question to you is, as we're starting to head into the next decade of some of the biggest deficits that the governments have ever seen, not only in just Canada, North America, but globally, healthcare costs are going up. It's becoming part of the human condition and our situation and the economy. Do you think this is a good thing for pharmaceutical companies? Do you think that there's going to be increased opportunity to negotiate more money, more access, more reimbursement? Or do you think that all of this conversation is at the detriment of pharmaceutical companies and the launches of these new products that are bringing great value to patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few parts to that. Do I want to see, more spending, on the pandemic to get it under control, to get us all back to life, of course. But I do understand that that those things do have to get paid for at the end of the day. But I'm sure, much like yourself, Natalie, what I found really interesting is that the pandemic, in a way, can kind of is and can continue to serve the industry well, and that I have never had more people in my life be more interested in what it is that I do for a living until the last year. I think that most people just, they have a cursory understanding of sort of pharmaceuticals and devices, and that's it. And I've never had so many questions from friends and family about, well, how does this work? What does happen? How, why don't we have access to this, that, or, the other therapies? So, I think the pandemic has really brought a renewed focus on the healthcare industry. And, my hope is that this is for the long-term improvement and advancement for Canada. I think that this is a great opportunity. The ears of the public, let's say, are open right now to hear about the industry, and people are interested in learning, I think, more so than they ever have before. And I think this affords us an opportunity to create some public awareness and some education about the challenges and the complexities of our industry, and what some of the financial barriers are that we face as an industry, and just creating some of that awareness and understanding, and really an opportunity for us to, as an industry, communicate our commitment ultimately at the end of the day to the healthcare of Canadians. So yes, I think that this is sort of one of the positive things of the pandemic, is that it really has opened up that dialogue.
I think it's beautiful. And it does actually make one wonder, in that increased awareness, and also with the awareness that Canada is factually really behind in terms of the amount of vaccinations that have come through, or vaccination levels. And a part of that dialogue or discourse has been about the inability to have functioning manufacturing facilities in Canada. A dialogue on, is Canada the best place to launch products because we're not as competitive from a price standpoint, and hence companies, so it's potentially brought up a lot of these flaring topics that one doesn't want to necessarily bring up. Is this an opportunity for pharmaceutical companies, in collaboration with pharmaceutical associations that represent the companies from across the country, to be able to get into a positive dialogue about these topics now that it's top of mind? What can pharma do in collaboration with others to bring this very important topic to the hearts and minds of everybody involved?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, of course, the vaccination rollout is certainly a hot topic, without a doubt. And we're not a a vaccine manufacturer, so I'm not sure that I'm, kind of qualified to comment on that. But I think, and sort of coming back to your question, I think, what we have learned here and what is the obvious experience is that we have had the rapid development of numerous vaccines worldwide. And so, to me, what's the important learning, and in my view, what's critical here is this can be done, and this can be done quickly. So how do we keep that conversation going and keep the memory there for planning for the next pandemic, because there will inevitably be another pandemic. As Canadians, especially those of us in Toronto, this is not the first one that we've experienced in our careers, and there will inevitably be another one. So how do we take these learnings and translate them to the next time around? And how do we leverage how quickly these things have happened? These solutions have come to fruition and come, albeit a little slower than we probably would like in Canada. They still have come here, and how do we leverage that not just for the next pandemic, but for other diseases that are life-threatening or hugely impactful for patients? How do we use this learning to accelerate access in the future?
And as we start to approach the new digitalization or the digital transformation of all things, including pharma, how do we start to think beyond the pill? Are companies ready to start engaging with consumer electronic companies, an example, for add-on apps or life-saving software as a medical device to either extend the life of drugs that, for example, might be going off patent, or engaging patients in a new way? What do you think is going to be the promise for pharma as we start to move into the next decade of what it means to be a pharmaceutical company?
My gut reaction on that, Natalie, almost is I'm not sure that anything has changed immensely, and that I think as an industry we have always been committed to to the individual outcome of the patient and the overarching improvement of healthcare in Canada. And I think all of us within the industry would love to see Canada come to the forefront as leaders in healthcare globally. So I think the commitment to the value, and I know this is a catchphrase that's overused too, but the value add that we bring, I think that commitment hasn't changed. I think as I'd mentioned, I think what has changed is the dialogue, and that this value that we do already bring to healthcare in Canada is starting to come to the forefront. And and all I can say is I'd like to make sure that we do continue to do more of the same as an industry.
Fantastic. And as we start delving into this new world of real world evidence, real world medicine, uber customization of product dosing, everything from, again, far-fetched in the sci-fi in the future with 3D printing of medications that are specifically dosed to you, to just doing things like diagnosing for what you are, your mutations, genomics. What does your particular genetic makeup allow you to respond to or not? Where are we on that? And if, from diagnosis, so even when you're born, as an example, we might be able to employ predictive analytics that you might be having certain ophthalmology issues, or something that we can prevent from happening. What's your thoughts on the promise of that?
Oh, geez, I'm not sure I have an answer to that one. I think anything that can accelerate diagnosis early in any disease state, is something that we should be examining, from all fronts. It's a win all around. And I think that's really probably all I can comment on that one. I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment beyond that.
I just think it's exciting what the world holds, for sure.
Absolutely.
So I think on that positive, exciting, who knows, limitless possibilities of the world, I think a good time at the top of this hour to end this. I do want to say, really amazing to see what you've been able to do with the launching of a product and then an upcoming one, the hiring of new staff completely virtually. I think this is a very inspiring conversation that anything is possible when you have the right mindset, the right attitude, and the right culture. And I think it's fantastic. And we'll all be watching to see the great successes for Santen and the phenomenal opportunities that patients will have as these products are made available to them. If anybody's interested in speaking with Carol, partnering, seeing what other options there are, we will be leaving her contact information in the show notes. So please take a look for those when they become available. I want to thank everybody for coming in to listen to the show. Please come out and check out impetusdigital.com. If you enjoyed this conversation, these are the kinds of things we do asynchronously and synchronously through virtual advisory boards where you get various stakeholders having conversations, figuring out these tough questions, pontificating about the future, and coming up with real live enterprising consensus on things that can be done now so that we can reach far in the future. So thank you so much for everybody's time. Please like and subscribe so people can find our information. And I want to thank you, Carol, for a beautiful discussion and wishing everybody a great day ahead.